In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the streets. The air was cool and calm, broken only by the distant chirping of birds returning to their nests. It was an ordinary evening. One that many might overlook as just another day coming to an end, but for Lieutenant General Marcus Thompson, this evening would become anything but ordinary. Marcus was a man who had dedicated over 2 decades of his life to serving his country. A highly decorated officer in the Army, he had seen battles, faced danger, and earned respect from colleagues and superiors alike. Yet despite his accomplishments, Marcus valued simplicity. On this particular evening, he decided to take a leisurely walk after dinner, something he often did to clear his mind. Dressed casually in jeans and a plain t-shirt, he stepped out of his house, nodding politely to neighbors as he passed by. To anyone watching, he looked like just another resident enjoying some fresh air. As Marcus turned onto a quieter street lined with tall oak trees, he noticed a police car slowly pulling up beside him. At first, he thought nothing of it. Perhaps the officer was lost or needed directions. But when the window rolled down and a stern voice called out, "Hey you, what are you doing here?" Marcus felt a flicker of confusion. He stopped walking and turned toward the car, meeting the gaze of Officer Richard Grayson, a middle-aged man with sharp features and an even sharper tone. "I'm just taking a walk," Marcus replied calmly, keeping his voice steady. He wasn't alarmed yet. Interactions with law enforcement weren't uncommon in his neighborhood. Still, there was something about Officer Grayson's demeanor that made him uneasy. Instead of accepting Marcus's explanation, the officer frowned deeply and demanded identification. Without hesitation, Marcus reached into his pocket and handed over his driver's license and military ID. Both cards clearly identified him as Lieutenant General Marcus Thompson, a respected figure in the armed forces. But instead of easing the tension, presenting his credentials seemed to have the opposite effect. Officer Grayson scrutinized the IDs, his expression growing colder. "You live around here?" he asked skeptically, his tone laced with suspicion. Marcus nodded, pointing toward the direction of his home, which was only a few blocks away. "Yes, I do," he said firmly, maintaining eye contact. Despite his calm exterior, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why was this officer acting so hostile? Officer Grayson didn't seem satisfied. Instead of returning the IDs, he stepped out of his vehicle, his hand resting ominously on the holster of his gun. Marcus's heart skipped a beat, though he tried not to show it. He had been trained to remain composed under pressure, but this situation felt surreal. There was no logical reason for the officer to behave this way. He hadn't done anything wrong. Yet here he was, being treated like a suspect. Back up against the wall, Grayson commanded sharply, gesturing toward a nearby fence. Marcus hesitated for a split second before complying. He knew better than to argue. Experience had taught him that escalating the situation could lead to disaster. As he moved to stand against the wall, he became acutely aware of the eyes watching him. Pedestrians passing by slowed down, some stopping altogether to observe the exchange. Some pulled out their phones, recording the scene unfolding before them. What happened next sent chills down Marcus's spine. Without warning, Officer Grayson drew his weapon and pointed it directly at Marcus's head. The cold steel gleamed in the fading sunlight, and the weight of the moment pressed heavily on Marcus's chest. "Stay still," Grayson barked, his voice trembling with anger. Time seemed to freeze. For Marcus, who had faced countless dangers during his military career, this was different. This wasn't combat. It was humiliation. This was fear instilled not by an enemy, but by someone who was supposed to protect him. The absurdity of the situation struck Marcus like a punch to the gut. Here he was, a black man in his own neighborhood, being threatened by a policeman simply because of the color of his skin. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had fought for his country, risked his life for freedom, and now he was standing against a wall with a gun pointed at his head, all because of prejudice. People nearby began shouting, trying to intervene. One neighbor, recognizing Marcus, yelled from across the street, "That's General Thompson, he lives right down the block." But Officer Grayson ignored them, his focus unwavering. His grip tightened on the weapon as he continued to bark. Accusations. "You don't belong here," he spat, his words dripping with disdain. "This isn't your neighborhood." Marcus clenched his fists, fighting the urge to retaliate. He reminded himself that reacting impulsively would only make things worse. So he stood silently, his mind racing. Every second felt like an eternity, each breath heavier than the last. He thought about his family, his wife and children waiting for him at home. Would they ever see him again if this escalated further? The thought sent a wave of dread through him, but he pushed it aside. He had to stay strong, for them, for himself, and for everyone else who might find themselves in a similar position someday. Finally, after what felt like hours, backup arrived. 2 additional officers approached cautiously, sensing the tension in the air. They exchanged glances with Grayson, urging him to lower his weapon. Reluctantly, he complied, holstering his gun but keeping his glare fixed on Marcus. "Get out of here," Grayson muttered, waving dismissively. Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He retrieved his IDs from the ground where they had fallen and walked away, his legs stiff and unsteady. As he disappeared around the corner, Marcus allowed himself a moment to exhale. His hands trembled slightly as he shoved them into his pockets. The adrenaline coursing through his veins made it hard to think straight, but one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not for him, and not for anyone else who had ever been targeted because of their race. Something deep inside him stirred, a fire ignited by injustice. He realized then that this incident wasn't just about him. It was about exposing the ugliness of racism lurking beneath the surface of society, and Marcus knew he couldn't let it go unnoticed. Little did he know the events of that night were about to spark a movement, one that would challenge the very foundations of systemic inequality and demand accountability from those sworn to serve and protect. The video clips of the incident spread like wildfire. Within hours, footage captured by bystanders flooded social media platforms, showing Officer Richard Grayson pointing his gun at Lieutenant General Marcus Thompson's head. The images were shocking, disturbing even, and they struck a nerve with people across the country. Comments poured in from all corners of the internet, expressing outrage, disbelief, and sorrow. How could this happen? Why was a decorated war hero being treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood? For Marcus, the aftermath of the incident was overwhelming. By morning, his phone buzzed non-stop with notifications. Friends, colleagues, and strangers alike reached out to offer support, share their anger, or simply thank him for staying calm during such a harrowing experience. At first, Marcus tried to ignore the attention, retreating into the comfort of his home. But as the day wore on, he realized he couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been profiled, harassed, or mistreated because of the color of their skin. News outlets quickly picked up the story, amplifying the public outcry. Headlines blared phrases like, "Racist cop targets army," "Hero," and "Systemic racism exposed in shocking encounter." Journalists camped outside Marcus's house, eager to hear his side of the story. Initially reluctant, Marcus agreed to speak publicly, not for fame or sympathy, but because he believed his voice could spark change. In interviews, he remained composed yet passionate, explaining the gravity of what had happened while emphasizing the need for reform. "This isn't about me," Marcus said during one televised interview, his tone firm but measured. "It's about the countless others who don't have a platform to tell their stories. It's about the mothers who worry about their sons coming home safely. It's about the children growing up in fear of authority figures who are supposed to protect them. We deserve better." His words resonated deeply. People from all walks of life rallied behind him, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and abuse. Social media became a battleground for discussions about race, policing, and accountability. Hashtags like "Our Justice for Marcus" and "End Police Brutality" trended worldwide, drawing attention not only to his case but also to broader issues plaguing law enforcement systems everywhere. Meanwhile, protests erupted outside the local police department. Hundreds gathered holding signs that read, "Black Lives Matter," No justice, no peace, and protect and serve who? The crowd chanted Marcus's name, turning him into a symbol of resilience and resistance. Community leaders addressed the demonstrators, calling for immediate action against Officer Grayson and urging systemic reforms within the police force. Among the speakers was Reverend Clara Hayes, a longtime advocate for civil rights who delivered an impassioned speech condemning the officer's actions. We cannot stand idly by while our brothers and sisters are targeted simply because of the color of their skin, she declared, her voice echoing through the crowd. What happened to Lieutenant General Thompson is unacceptable. It is a reflection of the deep-rooted racism that still exists in our institutions, and we will not rest until justice is served. As the protests gained momentum, pressure mounted on city officials and law enforcement agencies to respond. An internal investigation was launched to examine Officer Grayson's conduct, while independent organizations called for transparency and accountability. Grayson, meanwhile, dug in his heels, refusing to apologize or acknowledge any wrongdoing. In statements released through his attorney, he claimed he had acted according to protocol and accused Marcus of being uncooperative during the encounter. But leaked body cam footage told a different story. When the video surfaced online, it painted a damning picture of Grayson's behavior. Viewers watched as the officer escalated the situation unnecessarily, ignoring Marcus's cooperation and repeatedly making racially charged remarks. One clip showed Grayson muttering under his breath, "This guy doesn't belong here," moments before drawing his weapon. Another revealed how he dismissed pleas from neighbors vouching for Marcus's identity. Public outrage intensified. Calls for Grayson's termination grew louder, with petitions demanding his arrest circulating widely. Celebrities, politicians, and activists joined the chorus, using their platforms to amplify the message. Even some fellow officers spoke out, criticizing Grayson's actions as reckless and unjustified. The tide was turning, and Grayson found himself increasingly isolated. Behind closed doors, city officials scrambled to address the crisis. Emergency meetings were held to discuss next steps, with debates raging over whether to fire Grayson immediately or allow the investigation to run its course. Meanwhile, Marcus continued speaking out, meeting with community leaders and lawmakers to draft proposals aimed at reforming policing practices. His efforts earned bipartisan support, igniting hope for meaningful progress. One key proposal focused on implementing mandatory bias training for all law enforcement personnel. Another called for stricter oversight mechanisms, including independent review boards to investigate misconduct allegations. Marcus emphasized the importance of equipping officers with tools to de-escalate situations rather than resorting to violence. "We need to rethink how we approach policing," he explained during a town hall meeting. "It's not about punishing every officer. It's about creating a culture where accountability and empathy go hand in hand." While Marcus worked tirelessly to drive change, he also faced challenges. Some critics dismissed his advocacy as opportunistic, accusing him of exploiting the incident for personal gain. Others argued that focusing solely on individual cases like his ignored larger structural problems. Marcus listened to these criticisms carefully, acknowledging the complexity of the issue. He knew that real change required more than punishing one bad actor. It demanded a fundamental shift in mindset. Despite the backlash, Marcus remained steadfast. He leaned on his family and close friends for support, finding solace in their unwavering encouragement. His wife, Sarah, stood by his side throughout the ordeal, reminding him of the impact his courage could have on future generations. "You're doing the right thing," she told him one evening as they sat together on the porch. "Even if it feels hard sometimes, remember why you started this fight." As days turned into weeks, the movement inspired by Marcus's story continued to grow. Schools organized discussions about racism and privilege, encouraging students to reflect on their roles in fostering inclusivity. Churches hosted prayer vigils, calling for healing and unity. Artists created murals honoring Marcus's bravery, transforming blank walls into vibrant tributes to resilience. Everywhere he looked, Marcus saw evidence of a society waking up to the realities of inequality. Yet amidst the progress, Marcus couldn't shake the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. He understood that symbols alone wouldn't dismantle systemic racism. Real change required sustained effort, collaboration, and sacrifice. And so he vowed to keep pushing forward, to use his platform to uplift marginalized voices and hold power accountable. By the end of the month, the momentum showed no signs of slowing. Protesters remained committed, organizing marches and rallies across the country. Lawmakers promised to prioritize reform in upcoming legislative sessions, citing Marcus's testimony as a catalyst for action. For Marcus, the journey was far from over. But as he walked through his neighborhood once again, now filled with supportive smiles instead of suspicious stares, he felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead might be long and fraught with obstacles, but with every step, he reminded himself and everyone else that even in darkness, light can prevail. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial of Officer Richard Grayson finally began. Reporters packed the benches, their pens poised and cameras ready to capture every detail of the proceedings. The atmosphere was tense, a mix of anger, curiosity, and hope filling the air. For many, this trial wasn't just about one man, it was a referendum on justice itself. Could the system hold accountable someone who had wielded power so recklessly? Or would it shield him, as it often did in cases like this? Lieutenant General Marcus Thompson sat stoically in the front row, flanked by his family and supporters. His wife, Sarah, held his hand tightly, her eyes fixed on the judge's bench. Their children, though too young to fully grasp the gravity of the situation, sensed the importance of the day and remained unusually quiet. Friends, colleagues, and strangers who had been inspired by Marcus's story filled the seats behind them. Outside, crowds gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for all," and "Accountability now." The weight of expectation hung heavy in the room. As the trial unfolded, witness after witness took the stand, recounting the harrowing events of that fateful evening. Neighbors described how they had watched in horror as Officer Grayson drew his weapon on Marcus, shouting accusations laced with racial bias. One elderly woman, tears streaming down her face, recalled yelling at the officer to stop, insisting she knew Marcus personally. "He's a good man," she had cried. "Why are you doing this?" But Grayson hadn't listened. Instead, he had ignored her pleas, keeping his gun trained on Marcus. Body cam footage played a pivotal role in the trial. Prosecutors presented clips from both Grayson's camera and those of the backup officers who arrived later. The videos painted a damning picture, an unarmed man, calm and cooperative, being treated as a threat simply because of the color of his skin. In one particularly chilling moment, Grayson could be heard muttering, "This guy doesn't belong here," before escalating the situation unnecessarily. The footage left no room for doubt. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or an overreaction. It was prejudice masquerading as authority. Grayson's defense team fought back fiercely, attempting to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. They argued that their client had been following protocol, acting on instinct in a high-pressure situation. Officer Grayson was doing his job, his attorney declared during opening statements. He encountered an individual in a neighborhood where residents reported suspicious activity. He made decisions based on the information available to him at the time. But the prosecution dismantled these arguments piece by piece. They highlighted Grayson's history of discriminatory behavior, presenting evidence of prior complaints filed against him by minority residents. Witnesses testified about similar incidents in which Grayson had targeted people of color, using excessive force or making baseless accusations. One man recounted being pulled over late at night for no apparent reason, only to have Grayson accuse him of stealing the car he had owned for years. Another described being handcuffed and detained outside her own home, while Grayson questioned whether she really lived there. Throughout the trial, Marcus remained composed, his expression unreadable. Inside, however, he wrestled with a whirlwind of emotions. Reliving that night was painful, but he refused to let it break him. Each testimony, each clip of body cam footage reinforced his belief that this fight was bigger than himself. It wasn't just about punishing Grayson. It was about exposing the flaws in a system that allowed such abuse of power to persist. During cross-examination, Grayson took the stand in his own defense. Dressed in a crisp suit, he appeared confident, even defiant. Under questioning, he admitted to drawing his weapon but claimed it was a precautionary measure. "I felt threatened," he said, his voice steady. "I didn't know who this person was or what they might do." When pressed about his racially charged comments, he dismissed them as misinterpretations, insisting he bore no ill will toward Marcus. The prosecutor, however, wasn't convinced. "You pointed your gun at a decorated Army officer, a lieutenant general, who presented valid identification and cooperated fully," she said, her tone sharp. "How does that align with feeling threatened? Was it his race that made you feel unsafe?" Grayson hesitated, his composure faltering for the first time. "I don't see color," he muttered, a phrase that drew audible scoffs from the gallery. The prosecutor pounced on the statement, pointing out its hollowness. "If you truly didn't see color, Officer Grayson, then why did you treat Lieutenant General Thompson differently than you would have treated someone else in the same situation?" The courtroom fell silent as the question hung in the air. Grayson shifted uncomfortably, in his seat, unable to provide a satisfactory answer. It was a turning point in the trial, one that underscored the central issue at hand: systemic racism embedded within law enforcement. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. As the foreperson stood to deliver the decision, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone leaned forward, holding their breath. "We find the defendant, Officer Richard Grayson, guilty on all charges," the foreperson announced, her voice clear and unwavering. Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by cheers and applause. Tears streamed down faces as people embraced one another, overwhelmed by the significance of the moment. For Marcus, the verdict brought a mix of relief and reflection. Justice had been served, but it was bittersweet. Punishing one officer wouldn't erase centuries of inequality or prevent future injustices. Still, it was a step, a small but meaningful victory in the larger battle for change. Outside the courthouse, celebrations spilled into the streets. Protesters danced and sang, waving flags and chanting slogans. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing images of jubilation. Marcus addressed the crowd briefly, thanking them for their support and urging continued vigilance. "This is not the end," he said, his voice strong despite the fatigue etched on his face. "It's a beginning. Let's keep fighting for a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." As the sun set, casting golden hues across the city skyline, Marcus returned home with his family. The house felt quieter than usual, the adrenaline of the day giving way to exhaustion. Yet amidst the silence there was a sense of purpose. Marcus knew the road ahead would still be long and challenging. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing that today, justice had prevailed, even if only for a single moment. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of the trial spread far beyond the courtroom. Media outlets hailed the verdict as a landmark decision, signaling a potential shift in how cases of police misconduct were handled. Lawmakers cited the outcome as proof that accountability was possible, renewing calls for comprehensive reform. Police departments across the country faced increased scrutiny, with citizens demanding transparency and action. Marcus became a household name, not just as a victim of injustice, but as a symbol of resilience and courage. Invitations poured in for speaking engagements, interviews, and panel discussions. He accepted some, using each opportunity to amplify his message of equity and fairness. At one event, he shared a powerful analogy. Imagine standing in a storm, rain pelting your face, wind threatening to knock you down. That's what systemic racism feels like. But together we can build shelters, places of safety and equality. And eventually, we'll turn the storm into sunshine. His words resonated deeply, inspiring others to join the movement for change. Young activists looked up to him as a mentor, seeking guidance on how to navigate the complexities of advocacy. Community leaders collaborated with him to draft policies aimed at addressing racial disparities in policing. Even skeptics began to listen, moved by his sincerity and determination. Yet, alongside the progress came resistance. Some criticized the verdict, arguing that Grayson had been made a scapegoat. Others dismissed Marcus's efforts as idealistic, claiming real change was impossible. But Marcus refused to be discouraged. He understood that progress rarely came without pushback. "Change is uncomfortable," he told a group of students during a school visit. "It challenges the status quo and forces us to confront our biases. But discomfort is necessary if we want to grow." As months passed, Marcus focused on building bridges between communities and law enforcement. He partnered with organizations dedicated to training officers in de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. Workshops brought civilians and police together, fostering dialogue and mutual understanding. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. Stories emerged of officers going above and beyond to serve their communities, earning trust instead of fear. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded, drawing strength from his family and faith. He reminded himself daily why he had started this journey, to create a better future for generations to come. And though the scars of that night lingered, they served as a reminder of how far he and society had come. By year's end, the impact of Marcus's advocacy was undeniable. Cities implemented reforms inspired by his proposals, ranging from independent oversight boards to mandatory bias training programs. Schools introduced curricula focused on diversity and inclusion, teaching children the value of empathy and respect. Art installations honoring victims of police brutality sprang up in parks and public spaces, serving as memorials and calls to action. The trial of Officer Richard Grayson had ended, but its impact rippled far beyond the courtroom. For Lieutenant General Marcus Thompson, the guilty verdict was both a victory and a call to action. While the outcome brought accountability for one individual, it highlighted the urgent need for systemic change within law enforcement. Determined to channel his pain into purpose, Marcus threw himself into advocacy work, determined to ensure that no one else would have to endure what he did. In the months following the trial, Marcus founded an organization called Pathways to Justice, dedicated to addressing racial bias and promoting fairness in policing. The name reflected his belief that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about creating pathways toward a more equitable society. With the help of community leaders, activists, and legal experts, Marcus worked tirelessly to develop programs aimed at reforming how police officers interact with the public. These initiatives included mandatory training on implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, and cultural sensitivity. One of the first major projects undertaken by Pathways to Justice was a series of workshops designed to bring together law enforcement, officers, and members of marginalized communities. Held in community centers across the city, these sessions provided a safe space for open dialogue. Officers were encouraged to listen to residents' concerns, while community members shared their experiences of discrimination and mistrust. At first, tensions ran high. Some officers bristled at accusations of racism, while residents expressed frustration over years of unaddressed grievances. But slowly, walls began to come down. During one particularly poignant session, a young black woman stood up and recounted being pulled over repeatedly for minor infractions she believed were racially motivated. Her voice trembled as she described the fear she felt each time she saw flashing lights in her rearview mirror. An older officer sitting nearby listened intently, his expression softening. When she finished speaking, he nodded solemnly and said, "I'm sorry you've had to go through that. I can't undo the past, but I promise to do better moving forward." Moments like these became turning points, fostering understanding and mutual respect. Marcus also pushed for policy changes at the legislative level. He testified before Congress, urging lawmakers to pass laws that held police officers accountable for misconduct. His testimony moved many to tears, especially when he recounted the fear he felt staring down the barrel of a gun wielded by someone who should have protected him. "This isn't just about me," he emphasized. "It's about every person who has been targeted because of the color of their skin. We deserve better. Our communities deserve better. His words resonated deeply, earning bipartisan support. Lawmakers promised to prioritize reform in upcoming sessions, introducing bills that mandated stricter oversight mechanisms and increased transparency in police departments. One proposal called for the creation of independent review boards tasked with investigating allegations of misconduct. Another sought to ban chokeholds and other forms of excessive force. Though progress was slow, Marcus remained hopeful. Every small victory brought them closer to meaningful change. At the same time, Marcus recognized that true healing required more than policy reforms. It demanded personal reflection and growth. For him, therapy became an essential part of processing the trauma of that night. Sitting in a quiet office with a compassionate counselor, Marcus allowed himself to confront the emotions he had buried deep inside. Anger, fear, shame, they all surfaced during those sessions, sometimes overwhelming him. But through it all, he learned to forgive, not for the sake of others, but for his own peace of mind. Reconnecting with loved ones also played a crucial role in his recovery. Family dinners became sacred rituals, offering moments of laughter and connection amidst the chaos. Sarah, his wife, reminded him daily of the importance of balance. "You can't pour from an empty cup," she often said, encouraging him to take breaks and focus on self-care. Their children, too, provided comfort in unexpected ways. On particularly tough days, Marcus found solace in playing catch with his son or reading bedtime stories to his daughter. These simple joys grounded him, reminding him of what truly mattered. As Pathways to Justice gained traction, its influence expanded beyond local borders. News outlets featured stories about the organization's success, drawing attention from cities across the country. Requests poured in from mayors, police chiefs, and community organizers eager to replicate its model. Marcus traveled extensively, delivering keynote speeches and leading training sessions. In each city he visited, he tailored his approach to address specific challenges faced by local communities. Whether discussing gang violence in Chicago or immigration issues in Los Angeles, he approached every situation with empathy and determination. One of the most transformative partnerships came when Pathways to Justice collaborated with a national nonprofit focused on youth empowerment. Together, they launched a mentorship program pairing at-risk teenagers with retired military personnel and former law enforcement officers. The goal was twofold: to provide guidance and support to young people navigating difficult circumstances, and to humanize authority figures often viewed with suspicion. Participants engaged in activities ranging from career counseling to conflict resolution workshops, building bonds that transcended stereotypes. Stories of transformation began to emerge. A teenage boy named Jamal, once known for skipping school and getting into fights, credited the program with helping him turn his life around. Through weekly meetings with his mentor, a retired detective named Greg, he discovered a passion for photography and enrolled in art classes. "Greg showed me I could be more than what people expected of me," Jamal said during a graduation ceremony. "He made me believe in myself." For Marcus, hearing such testimonials reaffirmed his belief in the power of connection. Change didn't happen overnight, but every success story fueled his determination to keep pushing forward. Even so, resistance persisted. Critics dismissed his efforts as naive or impractical, arguing that systemic racism was too deeply entrenched to overcome. Others accused him of being overly idealistic, claiming real progress was impossible without dismantling entire institutions. But Marcus refused to let cynicism dampen his spirit. He understood that progress rarely came without setbacks. "Change is uncomfortable," he reminded audiences during a university lecture. "It challenges the status quo and forces us to confront our biases. But discomfort is necessary if we want to grow." Despite the obstacles, signs of progress continued to emerge. Police departments that implemented Pathways to Justice training reported significant reductions in complaints of misconduct. Residents noted improved relationships with officers, citing instances of genuine collaboration. One neighborhood, council even nominated a local precinct for a community service award, praising its efforts to rebuild trust. Back home, Marcus witnessed similar transformations. Streets once marked by tension now buzzed with friendly greetings between neighbors and patrol cars. Children waved at passing officers, who stopped to chat and share smiles. Murals celebrating unity adorned walls where graffiti had once symbolized division. Slowly but surely, the fabric of the community was being rewoven. Even so, Marcus knew the battle against racism was far from over. Resistance lingered in certain corners, fueled by fear and misinformation, but he never wavered. Each morning, as he laced up his sneakers for a run through his neighborhood, he reminded himself why he started this journey. Not for fame or accolades, but for the belief that everyone deserved to live free from fear. And so, he pressed on, steadfast in his mission. By year's end, Pathways to Justice had grown into a nationwide movement, inspiring countless individuals and organizations to join the fight for equality. Awards lined Marcus's shelves, recognizing his contributions to social justice. Yet he remained humble, often deflecting praise onto the countless activists and allies who supported him along the way. "This isn't about me," he frequently said. "It's about all of us working together to create a brighter future." As fireworks lit up the sky on New Year's Eve, Marcus stood on his porch, watching bursts of color reflect off snow-covered rooftops. The road ahead might still be uncertain, but with every step he reminded himself, and everyone else, that change was possible. One act of courage, one policy reform, one conversation at a time. Years passed, and the legacy of Lieutenant General Marcus Thompson grew stronger with each passing day. His name was no longer just associated with that fateful evening when a racist policeman pointed a gun at him. It became synonymous with courage, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice. The impact of his advocacy work stretched far beyond his hometown, reaching cities, states, and even countries around the world. What started as a personal mission to hold one officer accountable had transformed into a global movement for equality and fairness. Schools began naming auditoriums after Marcus, honoring his contributions to civil rights and social justice. In one particularly moving ceremony, students from diverse backgrounds gathered in a newly christened Marcus Thompson Hall to celebrate not only his achievements but also the values he stood for: empathy, integrity, and perseverance. Murals, depicting his likeness, adorned walls in urban neighborhoods, turning blank spaces into vibrant tributes to resilience. One mural showed Marcus standing tall, surrounded by outstretched hands symbolizing unity and solidarity. Beneath it, bold letters spelled out a simple yet powerful message: "Together, we rise." Even statues were erected in his honor, standing tall in parks and public squares. These monuments weren't just symbols of his individual bravery, they represented hope for future generations. Children playing nearby would often stop to ask their parents who the man was, prompting conversations about racism, injustice, and the importance of speaking up against wrongdoing. Teachers incorporated his story into lesson plans, using it as a teaching tool to inspire young minds to dream of a better world. But for Marcus, the recognition wasn't what mattered most. What truly fueled him was seeing tangible change unfold before his eyes. Cities across the nation adopted reforms inspired by his proposals, implementing measures like independent oversight boards, mandatory bias training, and stricter accountability standards for law enforcement officers. Some departments went further, introducing body cameras and real-time monitoring systems to ensure transparency. Others prioritized community policing strategies, encouraging officers to build relationships with residents rather than viewing them as potential threats. The success, stories poured in from all directions. In Chicago, a police department credited its partnership with Pathways to Justice for reducing complaints of misconduct by nearly 40% within 2 years. Officers reported feeling more connected to the communities they served, while residents expressed renewed trust in law enforcement. In Los Angeles, A mentorship program launched in collaboration with local schools saw graduation rates soar among participants. Teenagers who once struggled with anger management issues or run-ins with the law found purpose through guidance and support, proving that investment in people could yield transformative results. One of the most heartwarming examples came from Atlanta, where a group of former gang members formed an organization called Unity Builders. Inspired by Marcus's message of reconciliation, they worked alongside police officers to mediate conflicts and prevent violence in underserved neighborhoods. Their efforts led to a significant drop in crime rates, earning them national acclaim. When asked about their motivation, one member simply said, "We saw what General Thompson did. He didn't give up on us, so we decided not to give up on ourselves." Despite these victories, challenges persisted. Resistance to reform lingered in certain corners, often fueled by fear of losing power or privilege. Some critics dismissed Marcus's initiatives as overly idealistic, arguing that systemic racism was too deeply rooted to eradicate completely. Others accused him of undermining law enforcement, claiming his push for accountability made officers hesitant to perform their duties effectively. But Marcus remained undeterred. He understood that progress rarely came without pushback, and that every step forward required patience, persistence, and unwavering resolve. To counter skepticism, Marcus focused on showcasing evidence of success. He invited skeptics to attend workshops and witness firsthand the positive interactions between officers and community members. He shared data highlighting reductions in misconduct complaints and improvements in public perception of law enforcement. And perhaps most importantly, he amplified the voices of those directly impacted by reform efforts, the mothers whose sons returned home safely, the fathers who no longer feared traffic stops, the children who dreamed of becoming police officers themselves someday, as pathways to justice. Expanded globally, Marcus traveled extensively, spreading his message of equity and compassion. In South Africa, he met with activists working to address racial disparities in post-apartheid society. In Brazil, he collaborated with organizations tackling police brutality in marginalized favelas. In India, he joined forces with grassroots movements advocating for Dalit rights. Everywhere he went, he emphasized the universality of the struggle for justice. "Racism knows no borders," he often said during speeches. "Neither should our fight against it." Back home, Marcus continued to advocate for policy changes at the highest levels. He testified before international bodies like the United Nations, urging governments to prioritize human rights and equality. His testimony moved delegates to tears, prompting promises of action and collaboration. Lawmakers introduced legislation inspired by his proposals, ranging from anti-discrimination laws to funding for education and job training programs in underserved areas. Yet amidst the accolades and accomplishments, Marcus never lost sight of his roots. He remained deeply connected to his community, attending neighborhood meetings, volunteering at food banks, and mentoring young people. On weekends, he could often be found coaching youth football teams, instilling lessons about teamwork and discipline. For Marcus, leadership wasn't about titles or trophies, it was about service. It was about lifting others up and empowering them to create their own paths to success. His humility endeared him to people from all walks of life. Whether addressing world leaders or chatting with neighbors over coffee, Marcus treated everyone with kindness and respect. He listened intently, valued diverse perspectives, and always sought common ground. Even those who initially opposed his efforts couldn't help but admire his dedication and sincerity. By the time he reached his late 60s, Marcus had become more than a figurehead. He was a living testament to the power of resilience and determination. His journey, from a decorated army officer targeted by a racist cop to a global icon of justice, inspired millions to believe in the possibility of change. Yet, despite the fame and recognition, he remained grounded, often reflecting on the lessons he had learned along the way. One crisp autumn afternoon, as he strolled through the same neighborhood where it all began, Marcus paused beneath a towering oak tree. Leaves rustled softly overhead, golden sunlight filtering through the branches. He thought back to that fateful evening years ago, the fear, the anger, the the resolve. It felt like another lifetime now, yet its impact shaped everything he had become. Young boy approached him holding a sketchpad and pencil. "Are you General Thompson?" the child asked shyly. Marcus smiled warmly and nodded. "I drew a picture of you," the boy said, handing over the pad. The drawing depicted Marcus standing, tall, surrounded by smiling faces of different races and ages. At the bottom, scrawled in careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for making the world better." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes as he knelt down to thank the boy. In that moment, he realized the true measure of his legacy wasn't in statues or awards. It was in the hearts of those he inspired to dream bigger, reach higher, and stand firmer in the face of adversity. As he walked away, clutching the drawing close to his chest, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead might still be long, but with every step he reminded himself and everyone else that even in darkness, light can prevail. As the years rolled on, Lieutenant General Marcus Thompson's legacy continued to grow, not just as a symbol of resistance, but as a beacon of hope for generations to come. The seeds he had planted decades earlier, through his advocacy, reforms, and unwavering commitment to justice, had taken root and flourished into a forest of change. Yet even in his twilight years, Marcus never stopped working toward a fairer, kinder world. His journey was far from over, and he knew that the fight against systemic racism required constant vigilance. By now, Pathways to Justice had evolved into a global institution with branches operating in dozens of countries. What began as a small organization focused on police reform had expanded its scope to address broader issues of inequality, including education disparities, economic injustice, and healthcare access. The group launched initiatives aimed at empowering marginalized communities, providing resources like scholarships, job training programs, and legal aid clinics. In low-income neighborhoods, they built community centers equipped with libraries, computer labs, and recreational facilities, giving residents safe spaces to learn, grow, and connect. One of the most impactful projects was the creation of a digital platform called Voices Unite. Designed to amplify underrepresented voices, the platform allowed individuals to share their stories of discrimination and resilience anonymously if they chose. These narratives were then compiled into reports presented to policymakers, businesses, and educational institutions, urging them to take action. For many, sharing their experiences became a form of healing, a way to reclaim power after years of silence. One user wrote, "For so long I felt invisible, but this platform showed me that my voice matters." Marcus himself remained deeply involved in these efforts, though age had slowed him down somewhat. He attended fewer rallies and traveled less, frequently delegating much of the day-to-day operations to younger leaders within Pathways to Justice. Still, his presence loomed large. His speeches, delivered via video calls or pre-recorded messages, carried the same weight and wisdom that had inspired millions. When he did make public appearances, crowds gathered eagerly, eager to catch a glimpse of the man who had dedicated his life to making the world better. His family, too, played an integral role in continuing his mission. Sarah, his wife, spearheaded fundraising campaigns and organized benefit concerts featuring local artists. Their children, now adults with families of their own, volunteered their time and expertise. His son Michael, a tech entrepreneur, developed apps to track police misconduct and monitor policy implementation. His daughter Lisa became a lawyer specializing in civil rights cases, representing clients who might otherwise have no voice in court. Together they formed a tight-knit team, united by a shared vision of justice. Despite his accomplishments, Marcus remained humble, often deflecting praise onto others. During a ceremony honoring him with a Lifetime Achievement Award, he took the stage to thunderous applause but quickly turned the spotlight away from himself. "This isn't my victory," he said, gesturing to the audience. "It belongs to all of you, to every person who has stood up, spoken out, and refused to accept the status quo. Change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens when we work together." Even as accolades piled up, Marcus faced moments of reflection. Late at night, sitting in his study surrounded by books and photographs, he thought about how far society had come and how much farther it still needed to go. Racism hadn't vanished. It had merely adapted, manifesting in subtler forms like microaggressions and institutional barriers. Police brutality, while reduced, still occurred in certain areas. Economic inequality persisted, disproportionately affecting minority communities. These challenges weighed heavily on him, but they also reinforced his resolve. "I won't see the finish line," he admitted to Sarah one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "But that's okay. As long as someone picks up the torch after me, the fight will go on." And indeed, the torchbearers were already stepping forward. Young activists, inspired by Marcus's story, emerged as leaders in their own right, organizing protests, drafting legislation, and challenging oppressive systems. Many credited him with igniting their passion for social justice. "He taught us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it," said Maya Carter, a 24-year-old organizer who led a successful campaign to remove Confederate statues from her hometown. "Every time I feel afraid, I think about what he did, and it gives me strength." In schools across the country, teachers used Marcus's story as a lesson in perseverance and moral courage. Textbooks featured chapters on his life, describing his military service, the incident with Officer Grayson, and his subsequent advocacy work. Students wrote essays imagining how they would respond if placed in similar situations, sparking conversations about ethics, empathy, and civic responsibility. One high school senior summed it up perfectly. "General Thompson didn't let hate define him. Instead, he turned pain into purpose. That's the kind of person I want to be." As Marcus entered his 80s, his health began to decline. Tractor made walking difficult, and memory lapses occasionally left him frustrated. Yet his spirit remained unbroken. On sunny afternoons, he could still be found sitting on a park bench, chatting with neighbors or offering advice to young people seeking guidance. "Don't wait for someone else to fix things," he often told them. "Start where you are, with what you have. Even small actions can create big waves." When Marcus passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 86, the nation mourned the loss of a hero. Flags flew at half-mast and vigils were held in cities around the world. Social media flooded with tributes, each one celebrating his contributions to humanity. Headlines declared him a champion of justice and a guardian of equality. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from a young girl who left flowers at the base of his statue. Attached to the bouquet was a note that read simply, "Thank you for showing us the way." Marcus's funeral was a testament to the lives he had touched. Politicians, activists, celebrities, and ordinary citizens filled the church, standing shoulder to shoulder in unity. Speakers included former mentees, colleagues, and even a retired police officer who credited Marcus with changing his perspective on policing. "He didn't just teach us how to be better officers," the man said, choking back tears. "He taught us how to be better humans." Afterward, his ashes were scattered in the park where he had spent countless hours reflecting and dreaming of a better future. A plaque installed nearby bore his favorite quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Beneath it, visitors added their own messages of gratitude and hope, transforming the site into a living memorial. Though Marcus was gone, his influence endured. Schools named after him thrived, producing graduates committed to serving their communities. Murals painted in his honor sparked curiosity and conversation among passers-by. Laws inspired by his advocacy protected countless individuals from abuse and discrimination. And the movement he started, the belief that everyone deserves dignity and respect, continued to gain momentum. Today, Lieutenant General Marcus Thompson is remembered not only as a soldier, but as a symbol of courage and change. Streets bare, his name statues honor his memory, and textbooks chronicle his fight for justice. Yet perhaps his greatest triumph lies in the hearts of those he inspired, young people of all races striving to build a better world. For Marcus, the battle against racism was far from over, But he knew that true change required more than punishing one bad actor. It demanded a fundamental shift in how society viewed race, power, and accountability. And so, he pressed on, steadfast in his mission. Even now, as new generations rise to carry the torch, Marcus's legacy endures. His story reminds us that even in darkness, light can prevail, that one act of courage, one policy reform, one conversation at a time, we can bend the arc of history toward justice. And though the road may be long, with every step, we move closer to a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.